The autumn rain drummed a relentless, hollow rhythm against the thick fiberglass hulls of the dry-docked vessels, making the coastal marina sound like a disorganized drumline in the pouring rain. It was the kind of unforgiving coastal storm that did not merely chill the surface of the skin. It sank into the joints, settling deep into the marrow and refusing to leave. I stood quietly on the top step of the harbor master's primary office, a converted, weather-beaten bait shop that hung precariously over slip 4 on weathered wooden pilings, holding a heavy-duty waterproof satchel tightly against my chest. Inside the secure canvas bag were the week's navigational logs, meticulously updated in waterproof black ink. The wind whipped off the open Atlantic, carrying the sharp, bitter, unmistakable scent of ozone, rotting sea kelp, and the faint, lingering exhaust of marine diesel fuel. I knocked twice on the heavy, salt-stained wooden door. There was no answer from within. I knocked again, louder this time, the damp wood feeling uncomfortably soft and ominously waterlogged under the knuckles of my right hand. The coastal storm was escalating much faster than the local meteorological buoys had initially predicted, and the late afternoon sky had already bruised into a deep, sickly shade of violet. A muffled, chaotic clatter sounded abruptly from inside the small office, followed immediately by a heavy, rushing splash and a very distinct, profoundly exhausted groan. My jaw tightened involuntarily. I grasped the cold brass handle, threw my shoulder firmly against the warped wooden frame, and pushed the heavy door forcefully inward. The interior of the primary administrative office had been transformed into a shallow, freezing swamp. Murky harbor water and municipal pipe runoff surged across the distressed pine floorboards, pooling deeply around the metal legs of overturned wooden chairs and soaking rapidly into the reinforced bottoms of stacked cardboard filing boxes. Standing in the epicenter of the plumbing disaster was Amara Diaz. She was my direct employer, the sole owner of this financially sinking independent charter fleet, and a woman who typically commanded this chaotic harbor with the unyielding, quiet authority of a seasoned naval admiral. Right now, however, she was losing a desperate, freezing war against a shattered municipal water line. She had clearly been caught off guard mid-repair when the aged plumbing system failed completely. Her work clothes were soaked through and dripping steadily onto the ruined floorboards. She was shivering, wrapped in a heavy moving quilt, and her balance was visibly off. The cold was clearly winning the battle against her adrenaline. "The main pressure valve?" Amara said, her teeth visibly chattering as she held up a useless, drastically undersized crescent wrench. Her voice was uncharacteristically thin, stripped of its usual commanding resonance. I tried to force the copper bypass under the sink because the persistent drip was ruining the interior drywall, and the aged pipe just sheared off the threading. I stepped carefully over the raised threshold, ignoring the icy, contaminated water that flooded over the reinforced steel toes of my leather work boots. I dropped my waterproof satchel onto the highest available wooden shelf mounted on the far wall, keeping the critical navigational logs safe from the rising interior tide. I surveyed the flooded room with practiced, clinical detachment, mentally mapping the flow of the surging water. "Where is the exterior municipal street shutoff?" I asked, keeping my tone level, clear, and deliberately stripped of any panic or judgment. "Outside." "Along the south brick wall?" she stammered, gripping the thick, moving quilt even tighter around her throat to trap whatever minimal body heat she had left. "But it requires a heavy iron T-wrench. I don't have one here. Derek took the main toolbox to his truck yesterday afternoon." She looked at the floating debris of her entire business operations, appearing defeated by the rising tide in her own office. I turned on my heel and navigated the slick, rain-washed wooden planks of the main pier, heading toward the gravel parking lot where my heavy-duty truck was parked. I unlocked the reinforced steel bedbox, the metal hinges groaning in the damp air, and retrieved a massive. As I jogged back toward the south wall of the office building, the practical, undeniable reality of the situation settled over me like a heavy lead blanket. If Grant Rivera, the ruthless corporate developer, currently circling this vulnerable marina like a vulture, managed to get his paid municipal inspector down here and saw this extensive water damage, he would immediately red-tag the office structure. If Rivera red-tagged this office, the fleet would lose its commercial charter license. And if the fleet lost its license, my upcoming transatlantic contract on the Windward, my only true escape route from my family's suffocating logistics empire, would die with it. I wasn't just protecting her feelings or playing the hero. I was actively protecting my route. I needed this harbor to remain fully operational. I dropped heavily to my knees in the freezing mud, ignoring the cold seepage soaking through my heavy denim trousers. I located the corroded iron cover plate, pried it open with the flat end of the massive wrench, and locked the steel teeth onto the rusted shutoff valve. The metal had practically fused together from decades of severe salt air exposure. I gripped the iron handle with both hands, braced my heavy boot against the concrete foundation, and threw my upper body weight into the pull. The muscles in my forearms burned, the tendons standing out sharply, the rusted metal shrieking in loud protest before finally giving way with a loud, satisfying crack. The valve turned. The rushing sound of water from inside the walls abruptly ceased, replaced only by the heavy, rhythmic drumming of the coastal storm. I stood up, wiping the thick coastal mud from my hands onto the side of my trousers, and walked back inside the silent office. Amara had retreated to the top of her mahogany desk, the only piece of furniture not currently acting as a shallow water reef. She was sitting with her knees pulled tightly to her chest under the moving quilt. I walked over to my satchel, unclasped the brass buckles, and retrieved a clean, dry microfiber towel I kept exclusively for wiping down delicate navigation instruments. I stepped toward the desk and set it down exactly 12 inches from her knee, ensuring I did not crowd her limited space. "The main supply line is secured," I stated, taking a deliberate step backward to give her room to breathe. "You need to change out of those wet layers before your core temperature drops to a dangerous metric. I will begin bailing the standing water while you recover." "I can't afford to pay you overtime for this, Archer," she said quietly. Her voice was hoarse. She didn't look at me. She was staring blankly at a floating stack of commercial maintenance receipts. "I didn't request a timesheet adjustment," I replied, turning my back to her completely so she could use the towel and change into the spare clothes she kept in her filing cabinet, offering her the only true privacy this ruined room could afford. Consider it a professional courtesy to the navigational logs I just spent 4 hours drafting. I prefer my extensive paperwork to remain undrowned. By the time the storm outside had shifted from a driving downpour to a steady, miserable drizzle, the office was mostly empty of standing water. I had located a heavy-duty mop and a commercial yellow bucket in the utility closet, establishing a monotonous, highly methodical rhythm in the quiet room. Wring the heavy cotton, push it across the distressed pine, absorb the remaining puddles, repeat. I wrung the heavy cotton mop head out into the yellow bucket, twisting the wooden handle much harder than necessary, like physical pressure could somehow fix the things I didn't want to name. Amara had re-emerged wearing a pair of dry, faded work jeans and an oversized gray wool sweater that swallowed her frame. Her dark hair was wrapped tightly in the microfiber towel. She was currently on her hands and knees, cataloging the ruined paperwork, her face tight with a specific brand of stress I recognized all too well from my former life in Manhattan boardrooms. It was the distinct look of a capable person calculating a debt they couldn't possibly pay. "The commercial lease renewal is in exactly 3 weeks, she muttered, holding up a smeared page where the ink had run into illegible blue streaks. "Grant Rivera is coming for the final site inspection on the 14th. If he sees severe water damage in the primary structural office, he'll flag the building as condemned. That's his leverage. He forces the municipal eviction, buys the harbor lot for pennies on the dollar, and puts up his hideous luxury condominiums." I stopped the motion of the mop. The name Rivera hit like cold salt water. I'd heard it bandied about in the mahogany-paneled smoking rooms of my father's country club, always spoken by men who smiled without it ever reaching their eyes. They built vast fortunes by burying local, independent businesses in endless, suffocating legal paperwork. I leaned heavily on the wooden mop handle, observing the sheer, bone-deep exhaustion lining Amara's eyes. "A structural condemnation flag requires a licensed municipal inspector's signature, not just Rivera's personal opinion," I stated, the formal, highly educated cadence of my upbringing slipping through the rough exterior of a deckhand. "We replace the damaged baseboards, run an industrial dehumidifier for 48 hours to pull the moisture from the joists, and patch the drywall. Rivera will have no legal or physical grounds to file the paperwork." Amara let out a short, cynical laugh that held no humor. Spoken exactly like a man who actually thinks the rules apply equally to everyone. "Rivera owns the municipal inspector, Archer. He bought the man a new 24-foot center console boat last summer through a corporate shell company. You've been working for me for 2 months. You're a brilliant navigator, but you clearly don't understand how this town actually works. Up here, money wins. Money always wins." The irony was as bitter as battery acid on my tongue. My father had taught me one critical lesson I couldn't unlearn during the years I was groomed for his empire. Whoever holds the paper, holds the port. I still maintained legal signing authority on a dormant corporate trust fund, a massive financial reserve I never touched, a remnant of a life I had walked away from to find peace on the water. But I kept that fact carefully locked away. Then we make sure there is nothing for his paid inspector to find, I said, my voice clear, steady, and not cruel. I will handle the baseboard removal and the carpentry. You secure the industrial dehumidifier from the main supply shed. She stopped sorting the ruined paper and looked up at me. Her dark eyes searched my face, scanning for the catch, for the hidden motive. She asked, her voice dropping to a near whisper. You're a captain. You don't have to mop my floors or rebuild my walls? Because? I said, turning back to the heavy yellow bucket and wringing out the mop head once more. I refused to let a trivial condominium project disrupt my routing schedule. It was a deflection, a sterile corporate excuse. The honest truth was that watching her fight so desperately for this crumbling piece of the harbor made me respect her immensely, and that quiet respect demanded immediate, practical action. The next 3 days were a grueling exercise in controlled chaos and silent partnership. The autumn squall warnings escalated from a standard advisory to a severe coastal threat, hanging over the entire harbor like a suspended blade. Amara was frantic but incredibly focused, spending long hours coordinating the dry docking of the smaller vessels in the fleet while fighting with uncooperative insurance adjusters on the landline. I focused entirely on the office repair. I borrowed specialized woodworking tools from Derek, the senior deckhand, and worked in complete, methodical silence. I measured the linear feet of the room, set the miter saw to exact 45-degree angles, and secured the new pine trim with a pneumatic brad nailer. The sharp, clean scent of fresh-cut pine slowly replaced the smell of swamp water in the room. It was highly tactile, honest work. On Thursday afternoon, the barometric pressure plummeted dramatically. The wind shifted direction violently, howling straight off the open ocean. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in under an hour, and the heavy steel halyards began to slap aggressively against the aluminum masts across the entire marina, ringing like panicked alarm bells. I was finishing the waterproof caulking on the newly installed south wall baseboards when Amara rushed into the office, her face paper white. The Odyssey, she breathed, referring to the massive 60-foot flagship vessel of her commercial charter fleet. The primary stern line just snapped under the crosswind. The gale is pushing her hull directly toward the breakwater rocks. I dropped the caulking gun onto the desk without a single word. We sprinted out the door and down the rain-slicked wooden planks of Slip 2. The rain was stinging, flying perfectly horizontal. The Odyssey was groaning loudly in the water, pivoting dangerously on her single remaining bowline. The massive fiberglass stern was swinging wide, drifting rapidly toward the jagged, unforgiving granite of the breakwater wall. If the hull struck those rocks with this much momentum, the fiberglass would shatter completely, taking her business down with it into the dark water. I need you on the helm, I called out over the deafening roar of the wind, treating her exactly as the commanding captain she was. Start the port engine to counteract the drift. I will secure a new stern line to the piling. Amara didn't hesitate or argue. She leaped across the widening, dangerous gap of freezing black water onto the vessel's swim platform, her boots slipping slightly on the wet teak wood. She scrambled quickly up the fiberglass ladder to the elevated helm station. I ran down the length of the wooden dock, ripping open the lid of the emergency dock locker and grabbing a heavy, 2-inch braided nylon mooring line. The distance between the dock's steel cleat and the boat's stern was growing by the second. I timed the incoming ocean swell. The wooden dock heaved upward. I jumped, clearing 5 feet of freezing black water, and landed hard on the side deck of the Odyssey. My right knee took the brutal brunt of the impact against the rigid fiberglass decking, a sharp spike of pain shooting directly up my thigh, but I ignored it. I hauled myself to my feet, secured the looped end of the line to the heavy stainless steel stern cleat using a rapid, flawless bowline knot, and threw the massive coil back toward the dock. Derek had just sprinted out from the repair shed. He caught the heavy rope perfectly, wrapping it fast and tight around the wooden piling. "Port engine is live!" Amara yelled from above, her voice cutting sharply through the gale. "Give me quarter throttle. Reverse," I commanded, using a sharp, universal hand signal to confirm the auditory order. The massive diesel engine roared to life, churning the dark water into thick white foam, fighting the sheer physical force of the wind. The terrifying tension on the single bow line eased just a fraction of an inch. I used the mechanical advantage of the boat's manual winch, hauling the stern line taut, grinding the heavy metal gears until the massive vessel began to slowly, painfully straighten out, pulling away from the deadly rocks. The fiberglass hull groaned loudly, protesting the immense strain, but the thick braided line held firm. I locked the winch down, my bare hands burning fiercely from the intense friction of the wet nylon rope. We were secure. The boat was safe. I leaned heavily against the stainless steel railing, catching my breath as the adrenaline slowly ebbed from my bloodstream. Up at the helm, Amara slowly cut the diesel engine, the sudden quiet feeling immense despite the howling wind. She climbed down the ladder, her hands shaking visibly from the exertion. She stopped exactly 2 feet away from me. The cold rain was washing down her face, but I could see the sheer, profound relief settling into her rigid posture. She reached out and gripped the sleeve of my heavy canvas jacket, holding onto the wet fabric like it was a physical anchor point. I looked down at her small hand, gripping my sleeve. I kept my own hands resting firmly on the fiberglass railing, practicing the brutal restraint I had perfected over a lifetime in boardrooms where showing emotion was considered a fatal liability. The previous line was severely frayed from salt degradation, I said, my voice unnaturally steady and formal. We will need to replace the entire inventory of dock lines before the true winter storms arrive. She let out a long, shaky breath and slowly released my sleeve. Right. The lines. I'll order the replacements tomorrow morning. She stepped back, putting proper, professional distance between us. You saved her, Archer. You saved the entire business today. We saved her, I corrected politely, refusing to take the credit that belonged to her decisive command at the helm. I stepped past her to double-check the tension on the cleat, deliberately ignoring the sudden, cold absence of her touch on my arm. The repair of the office finished a full day ahead of schedule. We had successfully masked the plumbing disaster, but the underlying friction between us had undeniably shifted. Amara watched me now with a sharp, analytical gaze. She noticed the way I held a marine VHF radio with rigid protocol, the precise, practiced way I tied a complex bowling knot, the fact that my emergency contact on my employment form was a high-powered corporate law firm in Manhattan. The massive class divide I tried so hard to bury beneath canvas and grease was beginning to show clearly through the seams. It surfaced completely on a quiet Tuesday evening. We were sitting opposite each other at the small, plastic folding table in the corner of the newly dry office, reviewing the physical maintenance logs. I had brought her a cup of hot black tea, Earl Grey, steeped for exactly 4 minutes, no sugar. I had noticed during my first week that she routinely discarded the cups from the local harbor cafe when they added cheap vanilla syrup, so I had started bringing a steel thermos from my own galley purely out of a desire for operational efficiency. She took a slow sip, closing her eyes briefly in obvious appreciation of the heat, before setting the ceramic mug down. She looked closely at a commercial shipping manifest I had filled out by hand. Your handwriting is completely ridiculous for a deckhand, she noted quietly. It looks like a corporate architect drafted it, and Derek mentioned he saw you reading a complex financial prospectus on your lunch break yesterday. Who exactly are you, Archer? I stiffened visibly. I carefully aligned my expensive metal pen perfectly parallel to the edge of the leather-bound logbook. I am the captain of the Windward. Don't do that, she warned, her voice losing all of its previous warmth. Don't give me the polite, empty corporate answers. You fixed my office without asking for a dime of compensation. You handled that storm crisis like you've commanded naval destroyers. Are you running from something? I am not running, I said coldly, my posture rigid. I simply prefer the brutal honesty of a maritime weather system to the endless, suffocating politics of my family's dinner table. She frowned, her sharp mind connecting the dots with ruthless speed. Martin. Your last name is Martin. As in Martin Global Logistics? The shipping conglomerate? I didn't answer. The heavy silence in the room was a complete admission of guilt. Amara let out a low, slow breath and leaned back in her chair. The dynamic in the room changed instantly, the temperature dropping as if the windows had been blown open. So, this entire thing is a vacation for you? She summarized, her tone turning brittle and defensive. You're playing deckhand to see how the other half lives, slumming it at a failing marina before you eventually go back to your trust fund in your corner office. That is a highly inaccurate and deeply offensive assessment, I replied, my voice dropping in temperature to match hers. Is it? She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the pine floor. Because when Rivera comes down here with his paid inspector, he holds the absolute power to destroy my entire life. If I lose this marina, I have nothing. My family's legacy is gone forever. If you lose this job, you just go back to a Manhattan penthouse. We are not playing the same game, Archer. We aren't even on the same board. I have no intention of abandoning my post here, I stated, standing up slowly to match her height. My personal finances do not dictate my loyalty. Loyalty is incredibly easy when it costs you absolutely nothing to lose, she shot back, the words hitting like a physical blow. She grabbed her truck keys from the mahogany desk. I'm going to walk the docks to check the bilges. Lock up the office when you're done. She walked out into the cold night, shutting the door firmly behind her. I stood alone in the quiet office. The Earl Grey tea in her mug stopped steaming, growing cold. She was entirely right. The stakes between us were fundamentally unequal. I could not change my last name, and I could not erase the billions of dollars attached to it, but I could change the board we were being forced to play on. The midpoint fracture occurred exactly 2 days later. An official, heavy stock letter from the municipality arrived, delivered by a process server via certified mail. Amara opened it in the office while I was charting a complex navigational course on the drafting table. I saw the blood completely drain from her face, leaving her ashen. What is it? I asked, putting down the brass dividers. An immediate, mandatory stop work order, she whispered, her hands trembling so badly the heavy paper rattled. Rivera didn't even wait for the physical inspection. He filed a preemptive legal injunction citing grossly unsafe maritime practices based on an anonymous safety report about the Odyssey nearly striking the breakwater. They're officially suspending our commercial charter license pending a full municipal hearing on Friday. Without the municipal charter license, her business phone would simply stop ringing by tomorrow morning. The entire commercial fleet would be permanently grounded. Her dedicated crew would go completely unpaid, and the commercial lease on the harbor would automatically default long before the month ended. She sat down hard in her chair, covering her face with both hands. It was the first time I'd ever seen her completely surrender. The fierce fight was gone from her posture. I walked slowly around the mahogany desk. I didn't crowd her space. I flattened the legal letter on the table, traced the municipal filing stamp with my finger, and circled a missing clerk's signature block with my pen. This is a standard bureaucratic intimidation tactic, I said quietly, keeping my hands resting firmly on the edge of the wood, refusing to touch her shoulder even though every instinct demanded I comfort her. It is paper, and I can dismantle this administrative procedure. I have the necessary resources, but I will not overstep your authority in your own business. I need your explicit permission to handle this. She lowered her hands, studying my face with exhausted eyes. The heavy skepticism warred with her sheer desperation. She could have easily told me to stand down and leave her to fight alone. She could have protected her fierce independence and her pride. Instead, she took a slow, deep breath, maintaining steady eye contact, and gave a single, definitive nod. Permission granted. I stood up. I walked to the office door, pulled my encrypted phone from my jacket pocket, and made a call I had sworn 5 years ago I would never make again. I called the senior managing partner at my father's corporate law firm in New York. The next 48 hours were an intense masterclass in aggressive, high-stakes legal architecture. I reviewed every line of the injunction, found the fatal procedural errors in Rivera's rushed filing, and cross-referenced the anonymous safety report against the harbor master's time-stamped maintenance logs, which I had meticulously maintained. I directed a team of 3 corporate litigators to draft a massive countersuit for tortious interference with business operations. More importantly, I authorized the use of my dormant corporate trust fund, executing a massive commercial purchase order that would alter the financial landscape entirely. My legal team in New York targeted the specific mezzanine tranche of Rivera's South Point development loan. It was a precise, surgical acquisition routed securely through a commercial escrow account, with the overnight close signed and finalized before the financial markets even opened this morning. It wasn't all his corporate debt, just the specific tranche that gave me the legal right to call the note. I did not hide a single step of what I was doing from Amara. I simply presented her with the complex legal documents to sign, explaining each specific clause and liability with clinical, objective precision. She watched me operate in this new, ruthless arena, her initial resentment and fear fading into a quiet, deeply observant respect. I was not playing tourist anymore. I was using the heavy weapons of my hated world to defend hers. The climax arrived on Friday afternoon, not in a sterile courtroom, but out on the wooden docks. The sky was an ugly, bruised slate gray, threatening yet another coastal blow. Grant Rivera had arrived in a massive black SUV, accompanied by the compromised municipal inspector and two men in cheap, poorly tailored suits. He expected to proudly post the bright red condemnation notice directly on the office door. Amara and I were waiting for him at the head of Slip 1. Rivera stepped out of the vehicle, casually buttoning his expensive cashmere coat. He had the slick, polished look of a man who rarely ever heard the word, "No, Miss Diaz," he said, offering a patronizing, sympathetic smile. A terrible shame about the municipal injunction. Truly. But I have a generous buyout offer ready. We can make this transition quite painless for you. Amara stood incredibly tall, the coastal wind whipping her dark hair around her face. She did not look at him. She turned her head and looked directly at me. It was a silent, absolute handover of power. I stepped forward, placing myself between Rivera and the office. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the exact, calibrated, dead calm tone of a man dismantling an explosive device. Mr. Rivera, the injunction was permanently lifted this morning at 0900 hours by Judge Harper. Your anonymous safety report regarding the vessel Odyssey was demonstrably false, as proven by the time-stamped maintenance logs and the sworn, notarized affidavit of the senior deckhand. Rivera's arrogant smile faltered slightly. He looked at me properly for the first time, taking in my scuffed leather work boots and faded canvas jacket, clearly trying to place me. And exactly who are you supposed to be? The mechanic? I am Archer Martin, I said, letting the heavy weight of my family's name hang in the cold air. And as of yesterday afternoon at 1,600 hours, my legal team routed a transaction through commercial escrow to purchase the mezzanine tranche of the commercial debt on your current luxury development project on South Point. The silence on the dock was absolute and heavy. The only sound was the sharp wind howling through the aluminum rigging of the sailboats. Rivera's face went completely rigid. He was a creature of leverage, and he knew exactly what that meant. If you pursue this baseless eviction any further, or if you ever interfere with Miss Diaz's charter operations again, I continued, my voice remaining dead calm and devoid of mercy, I will call in that note immediately. I will collapse your entire South Point project before you even pour the concrete foundation. Do you clearly understand the mathematics of this situation? He understood. The color rapidly drained from his face, leaving a sickly, pale gray. He looked nervously at the municipal inspector, who suddenly found his own shoes incredibly interesting and took a distinct step backward. Rivera swallowed hard, his carefully constructed arrogance evaporating into pure, unadulterated panic. This is highly irregular, he choked out, adjusting his cashmere collar with shaking hands. It is highly effective, I corrected him sharply. You will leave this marina immediately. You will not return. Your inspection is permanently canceled. Rivera didn't say another word. He turned sharply, got back into the black SUV, and furiously signaled the driver. The vehicle reversed aggressively out of the gravel lot, the heavy tires spinning and spitting mud. The threat was gone. I turned to look at Amara. The immense tension that had been holding her spine rigid for weeks finally broke. She let out a long, shuddering breath that sounded like a sigh of pure, profound exhaustion. She took a slow step toward me. You bought his commercial debt, she stated, her voice full of quiet wonder. It was a practical, calculated expenditure, I said, instinctively reverting to my formal emotional deflection. The financial yield on the commercial loan is actually quite acceptable, and it permanently secured our operating parameters for the fleet. Amara smiled. It was a true, genuine, luminous smile that reached her dark eyes. You are a terrible, terrible liar, Archer Martin. She closed the final distance between us. She didn't hug me. She reached out and rested her hand perfectly flat against my chest, right over my heart. The heat of her palm bled rapidly through the heavy, damp canvas of my jacket. I froze completely, the immense restraint I had practiced for weeks holding me firmly in place. I kept my hands strictly at my sides, simply allowing her to anchor herself to me in the quiet aftermath of the storm. Thank you, she said softly, the words carrying the weight of her entire livelihood. You are entirely welcome, I replied. The immediate aftermath was quiet and deeply functional. The weekend passed with the methodical, comforting rhythm of routine harbor maintenance. The storm finally blew itself out, leaving the coastal sky a brilliant, washed-out, freezing blue. I waited patiently for her to treat me differently, to treat me like a bank, or a corporate employer, or an outsider. She didn't. On Monday morning, the local harbor community gathered at the small, greasy diner at the end of the main pier for the monthly Maritime Association meeting. It was a noisy, crowded, chaotic affair, smelling heavily of stale black coffee, fried eggs, and diesel fuel. Amara stood confidently at the front of the room, holding her battered clipboard, addressing the local captains, mechanics, and suppliers. I stood quietly in the very back by the exit door, nursing a bitter black coffee in a styrofoam cup. The crisis was fully resolved. My specific purpose here, acting as a financial and physical shield, was technically fulfilled. Amara finished reading the mundane harbor updates. She paused, looking across the crowded, noisy room, her dark eyes scanning until they found mine in the back shadows. The room naturally quieted down, sensing the shift in her posture. "Before we officially adjourn," Amara said, her voice carrying clearly and strongly over the hum of the diner's old refrigerator, "I need to make a formal introduction to all of you. Many of you know him simply as the quiet guy fixing the docks these past 2 months. But as of today, I've asked him to take a permanent position." She smiled, the expression steady, bright, and utterly certain. "Archer Martin is not just the captain of the Windward. He is my official partner in the Diaz fleet operations. Any logistics, scheduling, or commercial routing goes directly through him." The room broke into loud, polite applause and murmurs of strong approval. Derek gave me a massive thumbs up from a nearby booth. I stood perfectly, rigidly still. Partner. It wasn't a grand, poetic, romantic declaration. It was a legally binding business title. But in Amara's practical, fiercely guarded world, a business partnership was the absolute highest form of trust a person could earn. She wasn't pushing me away because of my family's name or my wealth. She was publicly anchoring me to her side. She walked purposefully down the center aisle of the diner, ignoring the congratulations and backslaps of the other captains, and stopped directly in front of me. She reached into her pocket and held out a small, heavy brass key. "The master key to the main office," she said quietly, pitching her voice so only I could hear it over the diner's noise. "I expect you to use it," she smirked, a sudden, bright expression that completely altered the exhaustion in her face. 0600, Captain. Don't be late. And stop bringing that insulated thermos. It makes you look like a tourist. I bought a fresh box of Earl Grey. It's in the top right drawer of the desk." I looked down at the brass key resting in her open palm. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It was a highly practical, concrete decision. A shared schedule. A shared physical space. A shared reality built on competence and trust. I reached out and took the key, the tips of our fingers brushing briefly. The cold metal warmed instantly against my skin. I looked down at her, seeing the fierce, beautiful competence in her eyes, and the quiet invitation beneath it. I didn't need to run anymore. I had finally found the exact coordinates where I belonged. "I will be there at exactly 0600, I promised softly. "I know," she said. The dock stayed open, the nylon lines held firm, and for once in my life, I didn't want the horizon to be an exit. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.